Henry Leonard Stevenson, 12 years old, convicted of breaking into houses and sentenced to 2 months in prison in 1873. George Lamb, 17 years old, sentenced to 4 months in prison after stealing money. Henry Miller, 14 years old, was charged with the theft of clothing and sentenced to 14 days of hard labor. George Sucknut, 18 years old, sentenced to 21 days of hard labor for stealing trousers, April 9, 1870. Henry Cox, 19 years old, sentenced to 2 months of hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for stealing, March 10, 1870. James Donnelly, 16 years old, also known as James Darley, sentenced to 2 months in prison for stealing some shirts. James Freeman, 17 years old, sentenced to 21 days hard labor for stealing bread with his friend on July 7, 1870. James Logan, 20 years old, was handed a month of hard labor for stealing a coat on October 12, 1870. James Scullion, 13 years old, sentenced to 14 days of hard labor at Newcastle City Jail for stealing clothes. Jane Farrell, 12 years old. Jane stole 2 boots and was sentenced to do 10 hard days of labor. John Brooks, 17 years old, was given 42 days of hard labor for embezzling 14 shillings and 6 pence, October 10, 1870. John Connor, 19 years old, sentenced to 6 months hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for assault and robbery, December 18, 1865. John Davis, 19 years old, sentenced to 1 month of hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for stealing trousers, June 16, 1870. John Duffy, 16 years old. John was found guilty of assault and theft. He was imprisoned for 6 months. John Reed, 15 years old, sentenced to 14 days of hard labor and 5 years of reformation for stealing money in 1873. John Wheeler, unknown age, was found guilty of stealing 100 pounds of coal in October 1872. John Williams, 13 years old, sentenced to 6 months of hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for house looting in 1870. Joseph Green, unknown age, spent 4 years in the reformatory school for stealing a bag containing bread and butter. Julianne Crumpling, 7 years old, was jailed at Oxford Castle Prison for stealing a pram and sentenced to 7 days of hard labor. Martha Herbert, 12 years old, sentenced to 42 days of hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for stealing ½ shilling and 6 pence, February 23, 1871. Mary Catherine Doherty, 14 years old, sentenced to 7 days of hard labor after being convicted of stealing iron. Mary Hinnigan, 13 years old. Mary was also caught stealing iron and was sentenced to do 7 days of hard labor. Michael Clement Fisher, 13 years old, was charged with breaking into houses and sentenced to 2 months in prison. Robert Charlton, 16 years old. Working as a labourer from Newcastle, he was imprisoned for 4 months for stealing 2 pairs of boots. Robert Hall, 13 years old, sentenced to 14 days of hard labor in Oxford Castle Prison for stealing a leather strap, June 17, 1870. Robert Woodley, 18 years old, sentenced to 21 days hard labor for stealing hay on November 17, 1870. Rosa Halliday, 12 years old, sentenced to 10 days hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for the crime of false pretenses on February 9, 1871. Rosanna Watson, 13 years old, sentenced to 7 days of hard labor after being caught stealing iron. Samuel Curry, 16 years old, was handed 21 days of hard labor for stealing trousers on April 9, 1870. Sophia Norrout, 14 years old, was ordered to carry out 2 days hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for stealing wood on May 4, 1872. Stephen Monaghan, 14 years old, convicted of stealing money on July 25, 1873, sentenced to 10 days of hard labor and 3 years in Market Weighton Reformatory. Thomas Carter, 17 years old, was made to carry out 21 days of hard labor for stealing bread with a friend, James Freeman, on July 7, 1870. Thomas Williams, 14 years old, sentenced to 6 months of hard labor at Oxford Castle Prison for house looting in 1870. William Clark, 17 years old, was locked up and made to carry out 21 days hard labor for stealing a handkerchief on October 26, 1870. Alfred Blackwell, 16 years old, sentenced to 3 months of hard labor at Oxford Jail for stealing 6 pounds of Australian meat. Alice Dawson, 13 years old, was caught stealing an umbrella in July 1872. Amy Foy, unknown age, stole a bodice and had to complete 21 days of hard work. Charles Lovefree, 15 years old, sentenced to 3 months of hard labor at Oxford Jail for stealing a rabbit. Edward Fenn, 15 years old, convicted of stealing clothes on March 31, 1873, and served 1 month of hard labor. Ellen Hayes, unknown age, stole 2 studs and a waistcoat in May 1873 and had to complete 21 days of hard labor. Ellen Woodman, 11 years old, was ordered to do 7 days of hard labor after being convicted of stealing iron. George Green, unknown age, spent 4 years in the reformatory school for stealing a bag containing bread and butter. Thanks for joining us today on Searching History, friends. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment down below, and we'll catch you on the next one.